My name is Dr. Amy Stone, and I'm a sociology professor here at Trinity University. I'm going to talk a little bit about how to organize the data that you have for your project on studying monkeys and other animals at the zoo. So what you probably have at this point, hopefully, is several sheets of paper, right, where you've recorded on different trips that you've made to the zoo, behaviors that you've seen in the monkeys that you're observing. And you really need to take those piles of paper and turn them into a reasonable data set in order to organize your information. And Excel is a really great place to do that. The general logic of a program like Excel is that each row represents like all of the information about one thing, right? And each column gives you more specific details about that thing. So in this case, I have my monkey Bobo, and I'm writing down here how many total seconds Bobo spent using his right hand, his left hand, both hands, his right foot, his left foot, and both feet. And so one of the things you might want to do with your data, there's lots of different things you can do in Excel. You can use different sheets, which you can see at the bottom, is that you might want to have just one page or one screen where you have the total number of seconds that they use the right hand or left hand to do everything. So in this case, this is sort of made up data, my three made up monkeys here, Bobo, Pancake, and Sniffles. And I might want to go through all of my sheets and add up all of the times that they use the right hand and their left hand, because I might just want this summary data, right? So I can talk about differences between them and see like overall patterns. So this is one way I might want to organize my data. I might also want to, here's a different sheet, take one animal, like Bobo, and list all of the different kinds of behaviors that he might have engaged in. Hanging, grooming, feeding, swinging, picking things up. So I may want to have just one thing where I talk about more specific behaviors that Bobo engages in, where maybe I'll enter kind of the total amount of time that he spends grooming or feeding. There may be some behaviors where he didn't do it at all, right? So I can go through my sheets and I can do that. So that's another kind of possibility. It also might be that there's some behaviors I want to talk about specifically, like I want to just do something on hanging or feeding, right? That's something that I watched my monkeys do a lot, and I might want to do some comparisons between my different monkeys about that, and I could do that instead. So there's all kinds of different ways you can use Excel to organize really basic information about your project. And so the real advantage of doing this is that you can do basic things like, so if I want to know on average how often all of the monkeys used their right hand, right, there's this function up here called AutoSum, and if you just kind of highlight the area you're interested in, it will tell you the average, right? On average, and this is kind of helpful. So I want to talk about monkeys that do this more or less on average, right? Here, most of them are pretty close to the average, right? So I can talk about like, well, on average, they all kind of use their right hand a lot, right? Both hand behavior, however, is a little bit more complicated. If I get the average for that, the average is 32. If you notice here, none of these three monkeys did anything around 32 seconds. One of them was much more likely to use both hands, and two of them are much less likely to, and you can kind of get at that using the average, doing those comparisons between them. There are also other options up here. You could do an average across this way and say like, okay, for this particular monkey, when on average, how often are they using any of their hands or both feet? And then you can talk about some things like they really don't use their right foot as much. That's really below average, and their left hand, they also don't use that nearly as much. So the average can be kind of a helpful reference point. You also can look at things like the standard deviation, right? If that's something you're familiar with because of a statistics class, that's something you can get up here under more functions. Another thing you can do with this data is that you can put it into chart form, and charts are really useful because they give us a visual way of kind of looking at the data. So say I was just going to want to look at, we're going to insert these charts over here. And I have some, I always tell students to be a little cautious about charts, because some things like a pie chart should only represent something that is 100% of one thing, right? So I would never take all of these and be like, this is one big pie chart, right? That makes no sense. What would make sense is something like this, looking at right hand and left-handed use, right, among this one monkey, right? This is a pie chart that does make a lot of sense, right? And if you notice, because I highlighted the top of this, that it labeled it for me, and that's really important. That it'd be really clear if you're going to put this chart like this out there, which can be really good to look at. If you're a very visual person, this can be helpful for you in your analysis. It's really important that it be labeled. And it'd be really clear, like this blue slice, what in the world is it, right? And what in the world is this about? This is oh, I need to add that in, back in, that I need to tell it that this is Bobo's hand and foot use, all activities. Right, so it's really important that it's clear what this is, and then what all of the different kind of slices are in the pie. If you want to do some comparisons between, you can do all sorts of design effects, but with any graph or chart, the number one most important thing is that everyone who looks at it, who's unfamiliar with your project, understands what it means. So don't get too distracted by colors and layouts. Make sure you have clarity first. The other thing we could do is if we wanted to compare between these three different, say we wanted to do these, that's not what I wanted, do these three folks, and then a pie chart would not actually make sense. Then we might want to actually do like a bar chart. So there are some bar charts where you can compare between two different groups, right? You can see some of them here, this one and that one, right? And some of these, like this is a stacked bar graph. Sometimes with Excel, it gets confused what you want to be on the x-axis and what you want to be in the legend. And actually, we need to probably switch those. So this is giving us a lot about format. And so what you want to do is to basically tell Excel that you want these switched around. We could also try to do it in this will give you lots of different functions. We need to get into the data. So we say select data. We could tell it we want to switch the row and column. And this chart makes a little bit more sense, right? This tells us how many total number of seconds that Bobo uses their right hand. And we can compare it to Pancake over here and to Sniffles. We can see a real visual display. And it becomes really obvious that Bobo is the most likely to use both hands, right, in this display. So that can be really, really useful. But you have to be careful not to kind of figure out like what kind of comparison makes sense. And so the way I usually do that is I look at each little color dot here, little bar, and I think, okay, what does this really mean? So in this case, it means Bobo uses their both hands for this many seconds in my study. Whereas in the other chart, it was kind of a little more unclear, like kind of what that chart meant. So these are some of the different things that you can do, all of which are very useful. But again, the most important thing for all of this is clarity.